Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Filippo Santelli. I'm an economic reporter for the Italian newspaper La Repubblica, and I previously was the China correspondent for the paper. It's a great honor to be here with you today and share this panel on China's century, fact or myth. Look, when I first read about this headline, I have to admit, I said myself, God bless this is done in Delphi, because to answer this, we need an oracle. And we don't even know what will happen in the next 10 minutes. We're asking about centuries. But good for us, lucky we are. We have not one, but 3 oracles today on stage, ready to answer with arguments, not with some ambiguous or enigmatic prophecies. We should have Cheng, on screen, reaching us from Hong Kong. He's an expert on Chinese elite politics and Chinese society, which after many years in the US, including at the Brookings Institution, just moved to Hong Kong, where he founded and heads the Center of Governance of China and the World at the University of Hong Kong. From left to right, from your left to your right on stage, we have Wang Huiyao, founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization in Beijing, one of the most influential think tanks in China, and who most regularly engages with Western peers. And we have Rob de Wijk, expert on security and military issues, founder of the Hague Center for Strategic Studies, and also professor of international relations at Leiden University in the Netherlands. Author of many books on the evolving global order, or should I say, maybe disorder. Quick housekeeping note, the usual note. We have 45 minutes, more or less. That should allow us to go through 3 rounds of questions. With that in mind, I kindly ask you to keep your answer within the 4 or 5 minutes range. Let me start with Cheng. You hear us fine, right?
Yes.
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 Yes, very clearly. To give us some long-term coordinates of what we're talking about today, because long before Donald Trump talked about making the US, make America great again, there was a leader who promised to make China great or strong again. And that leader was and is Xi Jinping. Call it the Chinese dream, call it national rejuvenation, call it the West is declining, the East is rising. From many perspectives, China is now stronger than it was when Xi came to power in 2012. But according to many observers, it's also facing some significant structural obstacles and challenges, such as demographic decline, the crisis of its investment-led growth model, and of course, the strategic competition with the US. Some even say that China may have already peaked. Professor Li, how would you describe China's current trajectory? And even more importantly, how do you think, as far as you can say, the Chinese leadership assesses this trajectory?
Well, first of all, let me say that I apologize for not being in the conference in person. Actually, I was on the way making transition, and was told that I could not arrive Athens in time. So I'm glad that we can arrange that by virtually. Now, I'm honored to be on the same panel with Henry, with Rob, and thank you, Philip, for the excellent question. Now, you're right that for China, it's also make China great again. And this is because of China 2,000-year history. Most of the centuries, China was a leader. And so it's a re-emergence of China, or re-rise of China. Now, whether people now talk about that the West is declining, the East is rising, Chinese leadership actually certainly holds that view, but they're also very cautious to mention that there's no causation between two, and also that the concept of West and the East are subject to debate. because now it's not just the West is in declining, but the more important, more urgent is the West is spread. Now, the so-called East is different from the Cold War, and China also need to be very cautious about the East rising. But in terms of the relative power of East and the Southeast Asia, and maybe even South Asia, that's a historical, I think, development that no one will deny. But also, Chinese are certainly keenly aware that this is a geopolitical landscape change. It's not easy. As you said, that China indeed is facing some structure changes in Chinese economy. The previous export-led model, the property-driven growth, or environment with environment huge costs, that model, their model, is over, and they need to find a new way to emphasize new energy and more balanced development, more sustainable development, and to try to find the way not to depend on export or property. So that's the right move. And also, there's China's economic difficulties also attributed to international economic slowdown, and also for Biden administration, so-called democracy versus authoritarianism, that led some of the countries, particularly EU, to cut off the trade with China or reduce trade with China in the name of de-risking or decoupling and etc. Now the trade war, it's certainly caught everyone's attention. But in my observation, as I lived here for the past almost 2 years, I found the Chinese leadership is really feel that the time is on their side. And China has well prepared for the trade war, because 3 or 4 years ago, Xi Jinping already talked about the twin circulation, not only completely depend on the foreign, the international circulation, and China still needs that, but the percentage reduced from 70% to now 30% or 40%. But domestic demand or development-driven growth become like 60% or 70%. Now, also China look at the things more on the geopolitical side, not just the trade issue, not just the economic issue. As we know that the trade economic issue is always low politics, but the security is a high politics. This is everywhere. So China feel that now U.S. is isolated, not China isolated. China want to, you see that moment. And also Chinese leadership look at the long term, not short term. So they not just look at the next few years, but look at the 10 years game, emphasize technology innovation, financial reform, and also new energy. And China certainly hope will improve relationship with EU, and China's relationship with ASEAN country is already good. They hope that the end of possible end of the Ukraine war will improve China's relation with EU country. So I think the so-called peak is ridiculous. I do see, of course, China faces economic problem. Which country not facing economic problem? But relatively speaking, China maintains economic sustainability and also political stability. These are very, very important. Over.
Thank you, thank you. Well, already a lot of food for thought. Now I have to bring the U.S. and Donald Trump in the picture, and that also means bringing some breaking news in the picture, because we're witnessing a daily escalation in the commercial, in the tariff war. We've seen Trump applying an other 50% extra tariffs to China, or I should say extra tariffs to China, and China responding tit for tat. So, Wang Huiyao, what I want to ask you is, first, where this is going? Is there still a floor in the bilateral relation between China and the US? And also, how does China see this? More as a strategic risk or more as a strategic opportunity? Basically, Donald Trump smashing the global order and alienating both enemies, friends, and everything in between.
Thank you, Chair. This is a great audience and also great panelist. We're honored to be in this great forum. Well, while we're sitting here, I just read the European Union just added another, 25% retaliation on Trump's tariff. Well, of course, China also added 50%, which is I lost track of them. There's so many escalation going on. But I think, that really is really not as counterproductive, and which is, I think, U.S. initiated this round of a trade war against the world, basically. It's not only China, but many other countries. As President Trump said, the world is ripping U.S. off, which is, I don't think that was right. For example, I can see, U.S. may suffer maybe somewhat of the goods trade deficit. But on the other hand, U.S. is in huge surplus on the service trade, on the huge surplus on the investment into the U.S., on a huge surplus of harvesting global talents, and also China buys a big chunk of U.S. debt, finance U.S. development. So U.S. has so many other advantages, and then yet, just because of this manufacturing goods, with that reason, U.S. launched the trade war. But U.S. was deliberate to get out of that because in old days, people regard manufacture as a dirty, labor-intensive, environmental unfriendly, and also very the last century industry. So they are pursuing high-end, high-tech, digital AI, which is fine. U.S. is leading that. So I think the world is divided into more complementary to each other, rather than I'm going to be dominating every front. So I think this kind of approach is really counterproductive. And then not only that, on China, but also on the rest of the world. So I'm thinking, this is going to be emotional stage of U.S. maybe at this time, and other countries also. I noticed the China Minister of Commerce just published a white paper today, which basically is saying, look, it's really beneficial to both sides, and China and U.S. The U.S. export to China in the last 20 years, the rate of the increase, the growth, is much larger than the average American export to the rest of the world. So they are actually enjoying big market in China. So just imagine if this 80% of tariff China add now on top of U.S. 100% tariff. What about Apple? 80–90% of product made in China. Are they going to add another 100% of export Apple phone everybody's using? What about Tesla? Half of Tesla was made in China. So what about people buying the Tesla with another 80%? Walmart purchase used to be 80% of product from China. Now it's 60%. So what mean by consumers in the U.S.? They have to pay 60%, 80% more. So I think it's really insane, basically. So I'm thinking if U.S. really think twice, they are gaining all other front, but just losing a little, somewhat on this merchandise front. It's okay. You can be supplementary on other benefit you have, and China is your largest debt owner to financing the U.S. Deficit. So I think it doesn't make sense to really using that as excuse. But also on the fentanyl, President Trump said there's 20% tariff added on the fentanyl. The former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State published in the op-ed New York Times saying they are making great progress. Homeland Security making great progress with China. And last year, the fentanyl death rate dropped 27% in the U.S. thanks for the China effort. So I think we should continue to talk, and I think both sides now should engage in dialogue, sending the ministers and secretaries. Let's talk about that. So I think if that is happening, I'm sure things can calm down quickly. I hope that President Trump is right. He's saying, if China and the U.S. works together, nothing in the world we cannot resolve. And we still have the Ukraine-Russian war. We still have a Palestinian-Israel conflict and the Iranian nuclear issue, North Korean nuclear issue. U.S. and China has to work together. So I think, we'll come to the rational stage as time goes on.
Yeah, hopefully. Professor Derek, you once authored a book on how China takes power. And China has consistently said that it doesn't seek hegemony, at least not in the US sense. And I think this is at least partially true, at least for now. But now that the United States appears to embrace protectionism and unilateralism, do you see China attempting to fill that void? And how?
Well, it's a good question. the whole point here is that we are in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution. That's the revolution of robotization, artificial intelligence, quantum computer, you name it. The one who wins or is the champion of such a revolution defines the rules of the game globally. So the stakes are high, and that is exactly the reason why the trade war has already started during the first Trump administration, and even before that there was a discussion on it. And remember that the Biden administration did not give up the tariffs imposed by Trump. So there is something going on here. So what Trump is doing right now is with China in mind all the time. Even if you talk about the annexation or whatever of Greenland or the Panama Canal, this is also about China. But the subject of this meeting is China's century. Is it a myth of it, or is it a reality? To be honest, I'm a little bit surprised that China is not number one already. I think that is something that we really should think about. If you look, for example, at the ASPI technology tracker, which is an Australian thing, then it monitors 64 critical technologies. And together they define a part of this fourth industrial revolution. Believe it or not, but the US leads in 7 of those technologies. The vast majority is Chinese. And that raises the question, if this is the case, why isn't China already number one? And how does this affect, for example, will this be affected by the Trump administration? I think that Trump will be the defining factor, and it could be very much in the advantage of China, by the way, also in the advantage of the European Union. One of the explanations why China is not number one already is control. It's the political system. I'm sorry there are 2 people from the country, but this plays a hugely important role. And crucially, if you look at the economic situation right now, then we see slack investment, poorly performing real estate sector, uneven growth. And some of the economists, I'm not an economist, predict that there will be a balance sheet recession in China pretty soon, and then the situation will be comparable to the slow growth or the non-growth of Japan over the last decades. That could be the case. But then back to the original question of this session. It really depends on Trump whether China will be number one or not right now. Of course, the trade war that is going on could have disastrous effects on China, but it also will have disastrous effect on the European Union. So that is not a big deal to put it like that. Most importantly, the Trump strategy and the Trump economic experience is based on shaky grounds. That's, I think, the whole issue. I've not seen, I've not heard one economist arguing that this is a great idea, and today is an example of this discussion. So the idea is to achieve a better balance through tariffs. So the costs are shifted to countries that want to trade with the US. The price of the currency, the dollar, will be lower, and the Chinese currency and the European currency will be up. And that is in the advantage of America. But what is ignored in the whole debate, and I haven't heard Navarro and other architects of this policy about this, and that is the reactions of the rest of the world. So the Western cooperation has ended in a way. Trust is gone, and trust is crucial in international politics. Without trust, you cannot have.
I'll get back to you later on that.
Yeah, right. But what we see now is a huge geopolitical shift. The European Commission reaches out to the former Soviet republics in the south, Kazakhstan, countries like that. The Brazilians, they do business and they want to pay in their own currency. China, and I love to hear more about that, China has an agreement, whatever, with Japan and South Korea on how to deal with the present situation. So what you see is that Trump forces countries to join and to fight together this trade war with Trump. But it's more than the trade war only. And this could have huge consequences, and this could lead to severe problems for the United States in the future, because this completely rearranges the geopolitical composition of the world. And that is extremely dangerous for America. And if this is the case, then that could be in the advantage of China.
Yeah, thank you. We'll get back to the international issues later, because I wanted to focus a little bit on China's internal issues, starting from the economy. I think it's the most pressing one, the economic model. Many observers suggest that China economic outlook is on a structural downward trajectory, and since COVID, China is caught in a sort of a crisis of confidence. So, Wang Huiyao, we've heard President Xi discussing many times a new development concept, yet at the same time, the growth still relies very much on some traditional engines like investments, exports. We've seen the commercial surplus balloon, supply-side incentives. How serious is for China the risk of a Japanification of its economy? Is it more resilient to this tariff threat than it was in 2018?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. I think that Chinese economy is much more resilient than probably we normally thought. Because, for example, I was in China during the COVID. I said, gee, everything shut down. We're going to have many years to recover. But I was so surprised during the Chinese New Year this year. The whole flights was exceeding the 2019 level now in China, domestic flights. Internationally, 70–80% has resumed. And they had a movie of NASA, and that's become the top 5 box, cinema box of the world. 100, basically $2 billion was cashed there. So you can see, and then of course you have tourism is totally back, and I was surprised to see, DeepSeek was out of blue is surprised not only the world but for the China itself. And then now there's an AI revolution going on now. Everybody was, because for example in Beijing, all the hospital now has to use DeepSeek to really have a big model, computing powers. And if I go to see a doctor, they're going to take all your data, and then AI and doctors seeing you at the same time come to the same conclusion or find the best, which is good for you. And of course, all the schools, for example, all the schools in Beijing has to assign 8 hours for students to study AI now. So I think the synergy is there, and that drive a lot of confidence. And President Xi met the private sector, Jack Ma and all the rest, top 50 private entrepreneurs, and met just recently all the 50 multinational who went to China Development Forum. So there's a big boost of confidence now, and what's more, I think the synergies there. You have basically 70% of the world speed railway network across China. 7 out of the 10 largest container ports, 7 of them are in China. And you have a 5G. There's 4.5 million 5G stations across China. And I was told in Europe, it's only 400,000 5G stations. So, and then on top of that, you have every year 13 million freshly graduate college students. Half of them engineering, science, STEM related. So you can see, and then stability. There's no strike like this, like we are happen at Athens right now. But so it's one 5-year plan after another 5-year plan. So I think as long as China maintains stability, China will be a global value chain center and the supply chain center, because all the big companies really feel this is most efficient, most productive, and most reliable market. And on top of that, China has 400 million middle class, and Premier Li Chang said next century China will have 800 million. So who can, pass this big market that China has? So to conclude that, I think that this trade war certainly is no help at all. It's really devastating for both sides. But I think China can probably, going through that with more domestic consumption. So
is that enough to balance? Because they're expecting between 1 and 2 point impact on GDP from the complete decoupling. Is it enough?
I think the U.S. is doing that is really going to isolate the U.S. itself. For example, in the last since the first Trump trade war, the China-U.S. trade has not gone down. Actually, it's gone up almost 20%. Yet China's dependency on the U.S. trade has gone down from 20% to 13, 14% now. So you can see China trades more now with Belt and Road countries, with Global South countries, and 70% of China trade was conducted with non-G7 countries. So they're going to diversify. ASEAN is China's largest trading partner, and so I think we can do more with Europe, with Canada, Mexico, the rest of the world. So I think there's a coalition probably through this trade tariff, now led by China, to really against the trade war that U.S. is launching. That you can see Canada, doing that. EU is doing that. So the more countries rebel to the U.S. on this trade war, I think U.S. is going to probably, in the end, to really slow down on that.
Thank you. You mentioned the Chinese middle class, and I wanted to ask something to Professor Li, because he authored the book on the Chinese middle class, which over the past 20 or 30 years has enjoyed a rapid and continuous improvement of its well-being. This dynamic was also central to the political bargain legitimizing the Chinese Communist Party. In the light of the economic growth now appearing more normalized, do you think, Professor, this political bargain still holds in the eyes of the Chinese middle class?
Well, the bargain you refer to is the Communist Party's legitimacy is based on economic growth, which is true in Deng Xiaoping era and in Jiang Zemin era. But in Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao era already changed. It's become more balanced development. And that continued to Xi Jinping era. They talk about common prosperity, talk about the social justice and also political stability. The middle class still continues to grow, and Henry Wang and also Rod had made excellent points about the China's technological development in some coastal cities. I just want to show you that this glass I got it from Zhuhai just a few months ago. I went there. It's a 3D print. I went to a store and they immediately measure from the high technology, then printed the glass immediately. Now, this also used some in other products. You can see very, very important development in the coastal region, particularly with middle class. But it's even more impressive for me is the remote area. Since I moved to this part of the world, I got the opportunity to visit a remote area like Guizhou and Sichuan and Yunnan, etc. I found the people there actually much happier, even than the coastal region people. They think the common prosperity really bring wealth and economic growth for them. So I do not see a challenge for the legitimacy for the Communist Party at all. Instead, I think the party is in a very good shape over the past decade or so. Now, again, the middle class also want the political stability, social stability. They may have some reservations. They may not be happy because the 70% of property, their asset is gone because of the property bubble and the government control. But on the other hand, I should point out that as my colleagues in the panel also mentioned, China has a high saving. That is very, very important at a time of difficulties. Chinese middle class will go through But look at the savings in the United States in the middle class, and middle class is shrinking. It's a major phenomenon that explains President Donald Trump got elected twice. In the first place, largely because of economic reasons. Of course, there's some other reasons, but the middle class is shrinking. It's an important factor. But China, yes, the middle class growth, maybe the percentage-wise, is slowed down. But overall, as Wang Huiyao said, that the Li Qiang mentioned that in 10 years they wanted to double down, and this is a really very ambitious plan. But I think that China should pay more attention for inclusive growth, how to not only just the Chinese middle class benefit or the poor people enter the middle class rank, but also China's neighboring countries and also United States and Europe. And so I think that's a very, very important the topic. I think at least the Chinese government realized the inclusive growth, but they should do far more to make sure that the industrial policy made in China 2025, because it will, to a certain extent, hit some other countries very, very badly. Of course, not China's fault entirely, because there's a global economic distribution, but as an emerging economic giant at the number one economy, Chinese leadership should be very, very sensitive how other countries look at China.
Thank you. Professor De Buc, I wanted to ask you about Chinese technology, but you already said that, China has caught up, or it's even ahead of the US. So I wanted to ask you something related to what Wang Huiyao was saying. So Trump might bring the rest of the world closer together in a anti-tariffs stance. At the same time, I see Europe being very much scared about the secondary effects of Trump's tariffs. So Chinese overcapacity flowing even more to Europe, to the European market. So do you think this will really bring Europe and China somehow closer or not?
It would surprise me at all. It's no coincidence that there has been a discussion between President Xi and von der Leyen, from the head of the European Commission. What was 2-3 days?
I think it was Premier Li.
3 days ago, something like that. And of course, dumping was high on the agenda. Of course, it is. What I really regret is that we, the European Union, do not have this technical agreement. Which was abolished or not signed or whatever, what was it, 5 years ago, something like that, when Biden came to power in the US, because that would have saved us a lot of trouble, because then we had something to fall back on, and we don't have it now. I found that a very unwise decision in those days, and I think it still is. So we have to renew that conversation with China. And is it a choice? Well, in the present situation, it's not a matter of do we have choice, but what options do we have? If you have to deal with an America under Trump, then you have to find new partners, whatever you would like to call them, if you like them or not, but you have to deal with them. So you have no choice. And in my view, we have no choice but to reopen the discussions with China and look how far we can go, because now we have all of a sudden a common interest in doing this.
Do you see China being willing to act on its industrial overcapacity, which is something that scares both Europe,
yes,
the US, and the rest of the world?
That remains to be seen. That's the big question. But also for China, I think that the options are limited. And we already heard a discussion about maybe we should do more with Canada, but also you can do more with the European Union. It's not easy, but times are changing. And that is, I think, the most important issue at stake here.
We have 5 minutes left, so I wanted to ask you the question, which is the headline of this panel. Is this Chinese century a fact, a myth? And if it's a myth, whose century will this be? No, maybe no one's century, a very disorderly century. I would like to start with you, Professor Lee.
Well, first of all, I think that we're entering a multipolar world, and maybe there's multiple polars, and certainly more than 3, more than 4, and but we do not know what the structure will look like. It's probably safe to say that the American century is coming to an end. And America, of course, still will remain a major power because of the technology, its strength in technology, in the military, and the US dollar. But even these are relatively decline. But the one thing that the US seems to lose is a soft power, and with the damage made, and also trust with the international American allies, and also broader international on the international stage. Now, of course, Europe will continue to be a very, very important actor in international arena, and it's a really very, very important continent. Will remain so for the foreseeable future. But one thing I should emphasize, it's not the China century. I don't think this is the right word, because China also needs to improve, even become the #1 economy. China's soft power is still very, very limited. China's influence still limited. And also it's important to know the Chinese leadership do not like that concept as a China century. And the Chinese leadership leaders always correct me when I said 2 superpowers. They said, no, China is not a superpower. Only superpower is the United States. Even they agree that the US-China relations is the most important bilateral relationship. China is cautious with the so-called superpower. Certainly, I think that there's part of the reason with Chinese culture, part of the reason with the current restraints. Now, but I think it's fair to say that there's a geopolitical landscape change in favor of Asia. This is my friend, the former Singaporean ambassador to UN, and Kisha Mahbubani. She used a term called CIA country, not to refer to CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, but refer to C is China, and I is India, A is ASEAN countries. Now that region is really the most dynamic over the past 4 decades, and the middle class increased by 10 times over the past 20 years in that region. And also that region remained peaceful, relatively speaking. But before that, it's some of the most vicious war occur in East and Northeast Asia. So I think that it depends on whether that region can continue remain peaceful and remain a driving force for economic growth. In that regard, China, India, ASEAN countries can play a very, very important role, along with the United States, along with European countries, of course, also some other regions. So I think I don't like the concept of China century, but you do see the major shift of power in today's world.
Okay, thank you. Now you have 1 minute each to answer this question. China's century or whose century?
It's impossible to say. You have to go back to Darwin, who wrote about the survival of species, and I think that is the whole issue. The one who is most adaptive will probably win. That's not the US. Adaptivity is not really something that can be attributed to the present administration. Can China be adaptive? Possibly. But I think don't underestimate the European Union here. Because what happened over the last couple of weeks in this part of the world are really impressive and really surprising. Rearm Europe, for example, is unheard of. We all of a sudden start to think about implementing the Draghi report. Many issues are now at the table. I heard quite a few people here lamenting the speed of the European Union, but it goes pretty fast right now. So it wouldn't surprise me if the European Union will be the big winner of this.
Well, Wang Huiyao, you've often talked about the Thucydides trap, how to avoid it. But the scenario here looks a little bit different. It's the hegemon who is revisionist. It's something unheard of in,
right.
in history. So who's the century?
Yeah, thank
To
you.
conclude, please.
Well, I think it would be the center of the world. I would really think it's. But of course, there's a bit of difference, competition among the different blocks. Well, I do think that Asia, though, probably will take some more progress because Asia now is probably half of the world GDP now, most populous continent, and of course also it's a region that hasn't got a war yet. No, there's no war actually in Asia. So I think now with ASEAN, with India, with China, just like our friend Kishore Mahbubani, I added a book for him, The Asian 21st Century, published by CCG and also Springer Nature. That book actually, the publisher thought we're going to download 20,000 would be most of the numbers, but it's actually now downloaded 4 million worldwide English. So I think you can see people are actually interested in the Asian century. Though I think it's the center of the world. We have to all work together. U.S., EU, China, global South countries, and it's with the technology, with the AI, we have to be leading on this progress for the mankind, and that's really most important.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, our oracles have spoken. Big round of applause for them. And the next panel, sadly, will ask about Cold War 2.0. So.
Okay. Thank you.